Okay, so we are now officially recording. So welcome everybody. We're so happy to have you here to our second workshop that's part of the Star School Social Disadvantaged Group Grant. This is all made possible thanks to that USDA Rural Development Grant. And thanks so much for Cooperative Catalyst for agreeing to, host and organize this presentation. And they will be sharing their expertise, and there will be chances for questions at the end as well as kind of throughout the presentation. So now I'll just hand it over to Cooperative Catalyst.
Awesome, thank you very much. So here we go. Eva's pulling up the slides. Perfect, thank you, Eva. I just want to say thank you to AA Tech and to the Star School, and we're grateful to be doing this presentation today. Let's go ahead and jump on in. So we have plenty of time at the end of this to ask questions. Next slide, please. CC&M's mission. Our mission is to improve the lives of people in the Southwest by catalyzing cooperative enterprises, upholding cooperative values, and fostering a healthy cooperative ecosystem. We do this by serving as a resource for individuals, groups, companies, and other organizations that are interested in forming, converting to, or growing co-ops. We follow a process to help cooperatives form, grow, and succeed. We provide training, education, and mentorship, and connect current or potential cooperatives to other resource providers, including financing. Next slide, please. So what is a cooperative? A cooperative or a co-op is a business that is owned and democratically controlled by the people that use its services. There are three hallmarks to any cooperative. There is member ownership. Member-owned cooperatives, the people who own and finance the co-op are the people that use the co-op services. Member-controlled, one member, one vote, regardless of how many businesses you have done with the co-op, or how much you invested in the co-op. Members benefit. The co-op's sole purpose is to provide benefits to its members, the people who use the cooperative. The benefits go back to the members in proportion to how much you have used the co-op in the past year. This kind of profit sharing in a co-op is called a patronage refund. Next slide, please. And if I'm moving too quickly through these, please let me know. Let's see. So another way to think of it, a cooperative is about coming together to achieve collectively what you can't individually. Next slide, please. There are approximately 40,000 cooperatives in the United States in every industry and sector. Next slide, please. Okay. So co-ops are all defined by who the members of those organizations are. Most common are what we call consumer cooperatives. They provide retail products and services to their members. This category includes credit unions like Nusenda. Credit unions are cooperatively owned financial institutions. The next type of cooperative you might be familiar with, agricultural or farmer cooperatives. These kinds of co-ops include producer co-ops. Some of the largest co-ops in the United States are Add CoOps. You might be familiar with names like Ocean Spray, Organic Valley, Sunkissed Raisins, or Land O'Lakes. I know that can come to be a surprise for some folks. Add co-ops enable farmers to focus on what they do best, which is farming, and help with the distribution of the products. Agricultural co-ops are owned by farmers and can include marketing co-ops and value-added processing co-ops. Marketing co-ops build markets for members' products and services. They improve members' bargaining power, facilitate delivery of products to market, and improve product quality. Value-added processing co-ops add value to members' products to increase members' share of retail markups. The most common type of co-op in the United States are the shared service co-ops. These co-ops behind the scenes and the people that interact with these businesses often may not realize they are co-ops. These include purchasing cooperatives, which purchase products or services in bulk to reduce or share costs among members. An example here is Ace Hardware. This is not a franchise. These are individual small businesses that have voluntarily come together to do some joint purchasing, national marketing, and develop a distribution system in order for those mom and pop businesses to compete with national big box stores. Lastly, and somewhat less known, are worker cooperatives. The smallest co-op sector, they are fewer than 500 in the country. They provide jobs for their members and services to the communities. Farms can also be worker cooperatives. This is where the folks who work on the farm co-own the business. Next slide, please. Okay, so how are co-ops different than other businesses? In many ways, co-ops resemble other businesses. They have similar physical facilities, perform similar functions, and must follow sound business practices. They are usually incorporated under state laws by filing articles of incorporation, granting them the right to do business. The organizers draw up bylaws and other necessary legal papers, but in some ways, cooperatives are distinctly different from other businesses. These differences are found in the cooperative's purpose, its ownership and control, and how the benefits are distributed. They are reflected in cooperative values and principles that explain the unique aspects of doing business on a cooperative business. Cooperatives are based on the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. Cooperative members believe in ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. Next slide, please. So it's always a debate whether or not to include these 7 principles. There is a discussion around, changing them, but we decided to include them here because you're doing Co-op 101, you will probably run across these principles and hear them talked about. So the International Cooperative Alliance adopted 7 cooperative principles in 1995. The cooperative principles create guidelines for co-ops to follow and allow co-ops to put their values into action. So number 1, voluntary and open membership. Anyone can join a co-op. They don't discriminate based on gender, social, racial, political, or religious factors. Democratic member control. Members control their business by deciding how it's run and who leads it. 3, members' economic participation. All co-op members invest in their cooperatives. This means people, not shareholders, benefit from a co-op's profits. Autonomy and independence. When making business deals or raising money, co-ops never compromise their autonomy or democratic member control. Education, training, and information. Co-ops provide education, training, and information so their members can contribute effectively to the success of their co-op. Number 6, cooperation among cooperatives. Co-ops believe working together is the best strategy to empower their members and build a stronger co-op economy. Number 7, concern for community. Co-ops are community-minded. They contribute to the sustainable development of their communities by sourcing and investing locally. Okay, next slide, please. Here is an organizational chart of any co-op. Members own the business and make decisions about the businesses, but that can be difficult to do when there are so many people in the organization. So the members elect a board, and the board will then hire a manager to take care of daily operations. The board is focused on governance, setting policy, and they empower a manager, CEO, or admin team to handle day-to-day operations for the co-op. And I see one comment in the chat that I'm just going to pull up. Okay, just making sure. Next slide, please. Bit of a delay on my side. Okay, so here we see a quick distinction between a large corporate business and a co-op with regard to ownership. A large corporation like Walmart is owned by its investors or stockholders, whereas the cooperative is owned by its members. Control over the businesses are also distinct in that individual shares determine decision-making power. With a cooperative, 1 member equals 1 vote. This is done to preserve the democratic decision-making process, and lastly, benefits. With most typical non-cooperative businesses, the investors are the beneficiaries. With a cooperative, the members benefit. And those are determined by their use of the cooperative. Next slide, please. Awesome. Economy of scale, co-ops allow small businesses to do what larger ones can. This could mean buying products at bulk rates, increasing volume to open new markets, and lowering their per-use cost of equipment, excuse me. Together, producers can lower costs, access needed services or facilities, or generate more income. People power. Allied producers can negotiate for better prices, diffuse risk, and share knowledge, skills, and labor. As to capital, farmers can pool capital to invest in a shared business, tool, or asset, and can increase their borrowing power with combined collateral and experience. Quality of life. Allied workers can arrange for time off, childcare, or extra hands when needed. Shared responsibilities, whether in selling, producing, or maintaining shared resources, means a lighter load for overworked operators. Continuity. Group entities can serve as longstanding vehicles to transition land resources and businesses among producers operating under an overarching entity. An individual farmer has more flexibility to retire or relocate and transition use to the next farmer. So sorry, Blue. My dog is inside going crazy. So next slide, please. Sit. Sit.
Okay, I think that's me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's me.
All right. I have challenges on my end. Are we skipping that slide?
Was
Okay.
there another one? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped it.
There we go. Challenges, and this is my last slide before I hand it over to Eva. Capital. Sometimes co-ops can have difficulty accessing the capital they need without being able to bring on investors. Working with other stakeholders takes more time. Working with others in general takes more time. Co-ops need to invest time and money supporting their democratic process. This includes educating members, holding meetings, and responding to member concerns. This can be time-consuming and sometimes expensive. Individualism, competitiveness. As entrepreneurs, many of us are accustomed to doing things our own way. Working with others cooperatively sometimes requires a shift in mindset. Compromise, sharing profits, revenue in a fair way, and sharing leadership and decision-making. Okay. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Eva.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Seidelman. I am a consultant with Cooperative Catalyst in New Mexico. I've been, or up the Southwest, I've been there for a number of years now, and I've worked with a lot of different cooperatives in the region and also back in Washington, D.C. I'm also an attorney here in New Mexico. I'm waiting to be licensed here in New Mexico. I'm still waiting, but should be soon. I'm also licensed in Washington, D.C. And I work separately for a small law firm that focuses on, we mostly represent Pueblo tribes and cooperatives and nonprofits. So it's a good intersection for this group. So let's see, why form a co-op? So you learned about, the cooperative principles and the general structure. That I will say there's some traditional ways of thinking about cooperatives, and then there's also some ways, there's a lot of flexibility, to be honest, which I will get into. But I know some of you are sort of cooperating, maybe have an informal cooperative, but you're thinking about forming a legal entity, either incorporating the state level, maybe Arizona, or the tribal level, maybe Navajo Nation. But so, why would you do that? I think it doesn't always make sense if you're really small and startup, but at a certain point it does make sense, right? It can be challenging really to go forward without that. So especially if you don't have a fiscal sponsor, you should form an entity as soon as you start handling money. Honestly, that becomes the main thing. You need to open a bank account. So you do need that usually to form an entity. And even if you do have a fiscal sponsor that is kind of managing your money, you don't really have, you're not really real, so you don't have any legal rights as an organization. Your members don't have legal rights or any real legal structure. You know, you might have like an informal structure, but at the end of the day, the fiscal sponsor gets to make the ultimate decisions. So that is another big reason to formalize your structure and form a legal entity. And you know, you're provided with protection, I guess, through a fiscal sponsor. If you don't have one, you're basically all operating together, so you could be personally liable if you're ever sued. So as members of a cooperative, you're not personally liable for lawsuits or liabilities related to the business.
Eva, I have a question, or should I hold the question till later?
You can ask it.
Okay, so in order to open a bank account for an entity that doesn't have a formalized structure, but that has a fiscal sponsor, does the entity need to form like or to apply for like a DBA or a business license, or you know, because in some cases when you open a bank account under a certain, you know, like a name, it's under my understanding that you may have to have a DBA attached to that or something, or do you know?
Honestly not. I don't know of any entities that have. I guess it is possible maybe to form your own bank account, but I really don't know. Well, you know, for the most part, I've worked with groups that have actually formed entities and then they form a bank account and then they open a bank account. That maybe just depends on the bank in terms of
Okay.
what they require.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's more of an issue of accounting, I guess, at that point, because you're not like a real thing. You can't enter into contracts or be sued if you're not a legal entity, really. I mean, you can, but it would be like just eat all of you together as a group, and that can get messy. So there may be ways that you can open a bank account, but I'm not sure. I would just ask the bank what they require.
Okay, and also just the second question is the EIN number. You know, I'm just wondering, like, for logistic purposes, would you recommend at this phase a group applying for like a business license or a DBA and a employer identification number?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be getting into like I think the best approach would, if you don't for some reason want to form a legal entity, again, incorporate on some level. To my knowledge, I don't know if there's a way to get an EIN number without doing that or without plans to do that. I guess you could be a partnership, which I wouldn't recommend. That means it's basically like a group of individuals, or if you each have your own businesses that are kind of like working together without a formal entity. So you could do that, but it's kind of messy. So again, I guess that's why I recommend thinking about actually forming a legal entity, and then you get your EIN number. That's been the process that
Okay.
I'm familiar with.
Great, thank you.
It may be possible to get one without forming a legal entity, but I've never done that before. So,
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
So is a co-op considered a for-profit or not-for-profit if the benefits are distributed to the members?
I will be getting into that.
Okay.
Trust me, I have a whole presentation. It's not, there's no straight answer, to be honest. I don't, and it's not really good to think in terms of like profit or nonprofit.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because I know that if you have a nonprofit that's a sponsor, that there are certain situations in which a nonprofit can sponsor a for-profit, and I'm wondering if a co-op fits those conditions.
Yeah, I mean, if a co-op is just, I mean, they're sort of separate questions. If a group is just operating informally in a cooperative way, and they're not concerned about managing their own money or having their own legal rights. They're just kind of operating under a 501c3. I don't like to use the word nonprofit because it doesn't really have a legal meaning. If you're talking about a 501c3 tax exempt organization,
Right.
yes, in some ways there are ways in which a 501c3 can serve as a fiscal sponsor for a cooperative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything the cooperative, it can get messy if the cooperative doesn't actually have its own separate legal entity, because cooperatives, there are some contradictory ideas about cooperatives and serving members and providing members with specific benefits. This isn't financial benefits usually that kind of contradict with the idea of what a 501c3 is. So sometimes, and I'm going to get a little bit into that later. So
Okay.
second, if it still feels unclear at the end, then just ask me again. So just want to think a bit big picture about before getting so much into, like how, okay, assuming that you do want to form a legal entity, I guess we're sort of operating on that premise. But even if you don't, right now, it's more important in some ways to think about like your structure. How is your cooperative functioning, right? Who are your members? Maybe you have different kinds of members. Maybe they're producers, maybe they're consumers, maybe they have voting rights, maybe not. How is decision making happening? What are the members contributing? So these are kind of like some of the main things that you're thinking about up front, and before you get like really into deciding where exactly you might be incorporating, it's good to think about this. Oh, my screen, excuse me. Sorry, my screen just minimized, so I lost my notes. So this is what you want to think about. Once you have a better sense of, thinking about some of these issues, then you can sort of get into the weeds of where you might want to incorporate. And it's also good to think about business planning, and not just about the structure of the organization and management and decision making, but also like how is your cooperative going to sustain itself financially? So that's key. So there will be, and so that's first, and then you can go ahead and figure out where you want to incorporate, assuming you want to do that, and go through the process of filing your articles of incorporation, which, there's certain specific information you need for that. And then you go back and refine your bylaws and get more specific about these questions, and have, actually finalize them and adopt them, your bylaws or operating agreement. And then, you bring in your members and you start operating. So that's kind of like those are the general steps. So the key to cooperatives, I think, and we think, and the thing that makes them a bit different usually than nonprofit like 501c3s are membership. So, and again, if we're thinking more on sort of a traditional cooperative structure, members have specific rights and they contribute in a specific way and they get specific benefits. And then they have specific roles in the governance. To complicate things, I know that we always say like there aren't any investors, we're very focused on members. There actually are roles for investors if you want to have investors. They basically shouldn't have voting rights. They shouldn't control the organization or make decisions, but sometimes there are some cooperatives that have, people who are contributing money and they're not doing that to make a lot of money, but they may purchase we call shares, which are a bit different from corporate shares, but they purchase shares and they might at some point expect a return. So that's a possibility. You don't have to have shares, but it does, if you're thinking about how to incorporate or thinking about how you're going to capitalize your cooperative, it's something to consider, because it's really not always sustainable to rely entirely on grants for the long term of a cooperative. Then it's just more like a 501c3, and it kind of is a little bit contrary to the idea of what a cooperative is, which is more self-sustaining. So typically members, I think of members as a group that democratically control the organization for whom the cooperative was created to benefit. So for an agricultural cooperative, the voting members are typically producers. Some agricultural cooperatives might also have a consumer class. So maybe they are, but that's complicated. I guess there's ways that you can complicate things and have different kinds of members, but I would recommend starting simple and focusing on, okay, you want the producers or the consumers to be members, for example. Maybe they're required to contribute a certain amount in money, volunteer hours, or product to become a member. You don't always have to think about it in terms of like contributing money. There's ways that members can contribute in other forms. And what's the benefit they're going to receive? Is it the ability to sell a product through the co-op? And there's different ways that could happen. Are they thinking about getting profits? Or maybe you're not thinking a lot about profits. And that's why sometimes cooperatives can be a type of nonprofit, but it's not necessarily a 501c3. You're just not focused on the profit. They're focused on the benefit they're receiving through the cooperative. They're selling products maybe, or they are able to use the cooperative through like a consignment type model. That's something we've seen a lot with producer cooperatives, where it's like they don't get the money for the product until it's sold, but the cooperative is helping them to market the product, their products. Maybe you have like a retail outlet, like a farm stand. So in that case, if you have a lot of regular consumers, you could also have some sort of consumer class, but they might not be voting members. I talked about investors. Is that something you're interested in, or has anyone sort of offered that? Usually like social impact type investors. So for discussion, does anyone want to put out there, it's hard for me to see the chat right now, but you could either put it in the chat or just share anything about your cooperative that you're thinking about forming. So who are the members? What are their roles? How are they contributing? And how are they going to benefit from the co-op? Anyone? So that I also have a sense of who is here and what you've thought about so far.
Sure. Yeah, this is Lily, and I can contribute in that regard. So we have the Hopi Food Cooperative, which is all volunteer. It doesn't have its own structure. It's fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit organization, and so it has basically like the basic structure of the board, what's emerging as a board, and then trying to develop its member area. But I think in the member area, we have like clearly defined, the member who can become a member, membership fees and dues annually for individual and family, as well as the benefits, clarified some of the benefits. In pre-COVID, I think a lot of the benefits were more accessible and available, but as we kind of developed these different realms, we saw right away that we need to embed like a staff position to manage the member the membership aspect, because like you mentioned, it's really labor intensive. It takes a lot of work and effort to communicate with members. And so one of the areas that the co-op is going through right now is the formalization process. So it's, and then also the co-op has offered a CSA share program. And so members who have paid their annual dues also have access to discounted rates for workshops or for the CSA share, and they have access to, you know, workshops that perhaps non-members don't have access to. So there's a number of benefits embedded in there, but for us, the challenge is to formalize the structure in a way where we are further defining like the board, the members, and then also the democratic aspects, as well as the business planning, to make sure that the co-op is you know, really serving its need and moving forward in that way. But this is helpful, I think. And so the way that the Hopi Food Co-op is functioning, though, is under the auspices of a nonprofit. And so basically, when that nonprofit is reporting on its 990s, its tax forms, it has to be able to report on the income from the fiscally sponsored co-op right now. And so moving forward, we're doing research to see if this co-op is going to emerge as a C3 or the different business models that are available. So this is helpful to me to learn more about, you know, the co-op models.
Okay. And are the members consumers or are they producers? I'm so sorry if I missed that.
Yeah, most of the members are consumers.
Okay.
We have a network of growers and farmers, but those growers and farmers are just individuals, and we work with them and network with them to access fresh, you know, vegetables and produce for the CSA. But the farmers that we work with aren't organized into a specific co-op either.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'll talk a bit more about working under a fiscal sponsor later, because it can get, it sort of depends on what, at the end of the day, you're just that, or they're the organization, and you don't, unless you have a formal legal entity, as I talked about, you know, it's all just, it's something that you're kind of, it's a handshake agreement almost, in terms of like having a board. Like there's no such thing as having like a separate, if the larger organization has a board, they're really the board.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. And
yeah.
another funny thing, I mean, it's funny, but not funny at the same time. But when we first started doing work in the co-op, we weren't organized. We didn't have a fiscal sponsor. And so one of our members actually held, because we brought in income through like farmers markets and different things. And so she actually, and this is awful, people shouldn't do this, but this is what happens, is that, you know, the income was stored in a locked box under her bed for like 2 or 3 years until we finally got a fiscal sponsor. And so so that's kind of how we emerged, is like really at a grassroots level where, you know, and a lot can happen through that process. So I think moving forward, we have identified the need to have a fiscal sponsor, take that money from underneath her bed and put it into a bank account, and just, you know, but that's really where this work emerged with the Hopi Food Co-op, which is kind of a funny story.
It's okay if you're small, you know, sometimes that stuff happens. But yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of fiscal sponsors too. You know, there's like the kind that you're talking about, and then there's the kind where you can have, again, a separate, you can still formalize your structure, but then for 501c3 grant purposes, if you do want grants, or for other reasons, you can have kind of a different kinds of relationships with fiscal sponsors where you might be quasi-independent. So there's not one way to do a fiscal sponsorship. So we'll say that. Okay, so my next, not sure if we have any other time to share, but if anyone wants to quickly share what they're thinking with a different cooperative.
Hello, can I say good morning? Tyrone speaking.
Hey, go ahead. Hey.
Good morning. So on behalf of the Add CoOp, we're still very new, and a lot of members I see are in the meeting. And I think what we're interested in is more of a formalized structure and getting to that point to where we're able to work cooperatively to, create a bank account and that form of structure. We have several producers throughout the region. I think we have over 40 hoop houses. And so we've been identifying and trying to map out all of our gardens and producers that are out there, as well as bringing in resources. We've been going to farm, providing work parties, so on a volunteer basis, and still investing and trying to educate ourselves about how co-op operates. And so I think that's kind of where we're at.
That's great. So your members are growers and producers.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, good to know. So let's do two different kinds.
And quick question, Tyrone, you said Dolko's Lead Cooperative is the name of it, or did I catch the name?
Yes, ma'am. Add CoOp.
I'd like to add something. So we're kind of on the other end of the continuum where we have a 501c3. We're thinking of being a food hub and want to know, what the how we would help to aggregate locally grown food and help out with marketing. So it's coming from the 501c3 point of view, and just to add to Lillian's story about the lockbox under the bed, we had kind of a bad experience many years ago with a group that where it was very informal, and the treasurer in the group got crosswise with the other members of the group, and the treasurer ended up taking the money and putting it in his own account until he was able to get people to agree to the way he thought things ought to run. It was very messy. So definitely I would recommend that people consider having something that's a little more formalized, just so you limit the liability. I mean, obviously we want everybody to operate on trust, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So
Yeah, it's true.
I'm
All
gonna
right, well, thank you for sharing.
keep our pay in a shoebox under my bed.
All right, so I'm gonna move on. So then the next thing, in addition to like what are the generally who are the members and who are the stakeholders, people and small businesses involved, you want to think about like the financial rights and responsibilities of the members, or if you have, again, if you're looking into invest, I'm not sure if anyone here wants to do that. We worked with some other co-ops that kind of generally are interested in it in the long term, even if it's not happening now. So again, having these kind of non-member investors, but thinking about, again, your financial structure, and if you're not relying, hopefully you're not relying entirely on grants, what are the member contributions? Because that's a key cooperative principle. So again, doesn't have to be money. Could be volunteer hours or product or something if you're a producer. There are some issues with consumer co-ops and relying on volunteers, but if you're on tribal lands, there's a bit more of a gray area, and you could get away with that more, to be honest. It depends on the tribe too, but yeah, then some of the labor laws don't necessarily apply. So, but thinking about defining patronage, if that is something that you want to do, if again, with a more traditional cooperative, you have at the end of the year, if you have any surplus, there's the word for profit really in co-ops is called surplus. So that's why I don't like to think about the word profit can get confusing. It's really like the idea of surplus, because cooperatives aren't created to make much of a profit, but if you happen to have a profit, then how is it going to be distributed back to the members or allocated back to the members? For a consumer cooperative, it's usually based on how much they purchase. For agricultural, it's usually based on how much they sell. But those are just traditional measures. There's different ways that you can define patronage. But when you get into tax stuff and accounting, it is important to sort of define that idea of patronage, so that you can figure out how that surplus or profit is going to be returned. And then again, if you have some shareholders, they can receive some of it as well, and it may be a different kind of formula. So they're sometimes called preferred shareholders. So it can get a bit complicated, and you don't have to do it this way. It's how a lot of cooperatives, as they get bigger, to capitalize their co-op, make sure they have enough money to keep things going, market the product, all the things that you need, especially if you don't want to rely so much on loans or grants. So one of the questions to consider again when you are formalizing a structure is, and especially if you're considering forming a traditional agricultural or marketing cooperative, is whether you're going to operate with or without shares. And this is a consideration too. And if you are forming a nonprofit, I'll get into this later, but you can have a co-op within a nonprofit or a different kind of thing, just operating on a cooperative basis. But thinking about, just want to put it out there, like thinking about this idea of shares. The primary reason to have shares, they're not like big corporate shares where you trade them on the stock market and they change in value based on like the value of the company. They're just kind of a way to define ownership sometimes in cooperatives. It's not required, but it's a possibility. And so especially again, if you do have some financial owners or investors, people who may not have voting rights, but they're just contributing, they might own a type of share, which they get a type of return. And so that all has to be kind of outlined in your bylaws if you want to do that. But they generally have like a fixed price. So the share is $100. The investor, if there are profits at the end of the year, they might get X percentage of the profits. And then the members will get this other percentage. So, so those are things you're going to want to think about. What else? I think that's about it for that one. Ooh, what did I do?
Hey, Eva, can you go ahead and refresh your system? Because I think that this deck has been updated.
What do I do? Refresh?
Refresh, yeah, refresh.
The deck has been, okay.
Changed, yeah.
That was probably an accident. Uh-oh. Okay, so I'm sorry, I was supposed to be on this slide for all of those things. Apologize for that, but just take a look at that slide. Again, these are some details that you probably don't have to think about so early, but especially with agricultural cooperatives, there are some questions about, sales agreements, between the members and the cooperative? Like, are the members selling? Do they have a right to sell a certain amount of product to the cooperative and the cooperative will purchase it? Or is it really just something where the cooperative is not agreeing to necessarily purchase it? And also thinking about like how people might get their money back. Is that something that they can do? If they're putting money in, the members or the investor shareholders, what happens when they want their money back? Some cooperatives basically make it not very easy, kind of like it's an investment, like you might not get your initial money back. So just thinking about those things. Another discussion question. I think some of you put this out there, but if you want to add anything more, have you thought about, what your daily operations are going to look like in the cooperative? How is it all going to work? Is there going to be a coordinator, as Lillian mentions? They want to hire a coordinator, an employee, or will it basically mostly operate? Well, the board. Sometimes there are working boards and cooperatives that do a lot of the work. Will you rely on volunteers? How are things moving in and out and flowing? So does anyone want to add any thoughts on that or any questions? I mean, I will say with volunteers, the arts cooperative that was featured in the slide, sorry, is the Vijay, you're asking me about an owl image?
Yes, and I apologize. I didn't look through this slide deck. Culturally, it's taboo, and I did try to take it off. Is it gone?
That's Caitlin who put that on. I know that's not a good idea. Sorry, our coworker didn't know. So yeah, volunteers. We had the arts cooperative in Zuni Pueblo. Like they were amazing. They and I think they still primarily operate based on volunteer labor. So that is something that can work if you can do it well and save some money. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat from Oakley. I can read it for you, Oakley. I don't know if you'd prefer to jump in and ask the question. Do admin, managers, and board of directors of the co-op usually get paid or earn more back than other members?
Yeah, there's different ways to do that. They can, I think that they could be, of course, having employees can get complicated. Again, when you're operating on tribal lands, there's different laws, and sometimes the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't apply and state law doesn't apply. So maybe it's less complicated, but you'd have to look at if it's Navajo Nation, their employment laws. So, the one thing with usually like the idea of employee, no matter what laws you're operating under, is like they're guaranteed a certain amount. So that's something that can be tricky financially if it's unclear how the cooperative is going to pay them. But if it's like based on some kind of percentage, you can work something out, especially if they're pretty independent. If they're essentially kind of like contractors and nobody's really telling them what to do on a day-to-day basis, which is kind of I won't get into the weeds now, but that's sort of a test for like, then they're more of a contractor. They have some independence, and then they're coordinating things in a way that they think makes sense. Then maybe they're getting paid, based on just in some other formula. They're getting free product, or they get a certain maybe a larger percentage of the profit. These are things that you can work out in your bylaws. Especially if you have a worker, if there's like a worker owner class of member, so that person they're contributing their labor, and they might get a return of a big return of the profit based on their labor. So I'm looking forward to, like, some of these details are things that I would like to talk with your groups with on kind of more specifically, because I know we have a number of different groups here. So it's hard to get too much into the weeds. Did that make sense?
There's some questions in the chat. And there's a comment from Tyrone. Nate Etsity is our coordinator. I think we are interested in all of the above. And Lillian asks, can you clarify the legal structure that cooperatives incorporate under?
Okay, I'm about to get to that. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are a number of options. Okay, so that was my next slide in terms of choosing a legal entity. So you can think of the traditional cooperative structure, especially for producer cooperatives, where the members are producers marketing their products, agricultural or value-added products. Under the Navajo Nation, there's the Navajo Nation laws, and then Arizona laws. There are particular cooperative association statutes. So that's the most traditional structure, and it's the one that usually makes the most sense. But it can be very specific, right? In some ways, sometimes it doesn't work for certain groups. And I'll get into some of the factors in deciding whether you want to formalize as a cooperative association, or you can operate on a cooperative basis, basically according to cooperative principles and general structures, as a nonprofit corporation, as a regular corporation, and I think even as a benefit corporation, and as a limited liability company. So I've seen cooperatives that work under all of the above. So there's different ways to think about that, what you want to choose. Okay, so these are some questions to consider when you are thinking about how to incorporate. And between the Navajo Nation and Arizona and even New Mexico, for the most part, these different types of entities are fairly similar. There are some slight differences, but I'm not going to get into like every single variation. Unless you have questions, I can try to answer them. But for the most part, their structures and the way that they operate under the law are fairly similar. The first one is, and I do want to, they should have been labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because then I have a chart for you. So number one is, do you want a lot of flexibility in your governance structure? So some groups don't really want, some groups are small and they intend to stay small. So we were talking with a kind of a little farmer co-op here in Albuquerque, and they're only about eight members or 5 to 8 members. They know that they work well together. They don't really want a big cooperative with lots of members because they want, sorry? Oh, so they want to stay small, and they also don't want to have a traditional board of directors and with officers, And so if that's really important to you and you don't want to have to conform to that traditional kind of structure, there is a way you can do that. But that's a factor to consider. Do you ever want to have these outside non-member investors or shareholders who contribute capital but don't vote? So is that something, do you see yourself wanting to have those? Maybe they're like social impact investors who want to have that role in the cooperative. Some groups do because they know of specific people and they don't want to rely on loans or grants. Do you want to be able to distribute excess profits to members or investors? So is that distribution at the end really important, or do you really just kind of want to operate again without thinking about distributing profit? It is possible to have a cooperative, especially consumer cooperatives. So when I think about water cooperatives, for example, the point is to really aggregate members to develop a system for distributing water. And maybe that's true of a a consumer cooperative as well. You're not really thinking about the profit, and you basically probably won't have much at the end of the year. So is distribution of profit even important at all? Or do you just put it back into the business to pay for infrastructure or other things, like put it into a reserve account? Do you want to be sure, this is number 4, do you want to be sure that the organization maintains cooperative principles such as democratic member control for its entire lifetime? So are you really sticking to these cooperative, this traditional kind of cooperative structure? Do you want to be sure that investors don't take over, or that it doesn't really turn into just a 501c3 where there's no member rights? That's another one. And then will you have, I think this goes back to the first, actually. How are you dealing with your labor and management? We have a small collective of members who will co-manage the organization, or do you want to have like a paid coordinator? So now I'm going to go over to a chart where I kind of summarize each of those questions. So 1 being thinking about flexibility, 2 thinking about whether you want to have investors, shareholders, 3 thinking about whether profit distribution is important, 4 thinking about whether co-op traditional structure is important, and 5 thinking about your, whether co-management. Again, 1 and 5 are fairly similar, so I'm not sure why I separated those. So I didn't have like a really great way to rate these, but I'll go through some of these in detail. So agricultural cooperative associations or marketing cooperatives are not great if you want a lot of flexibility, right? They do have a fairly traditional structure built in, a little bit more like in some ways a corporation, but with members, and member agricultural producer members have rights. But you have to have 5. You have to have 5 always. So the cooperative is illegal essentially if you have fewer than 5 members, and those people all have to be on board. So that's an issue with that one. With a nonprofit, you can have fewer members, and there's a little bit more flexibility, but you still need to have a board, and there's still some formalities and some sort of traditional structuring that you have to think about. Corporation is similar, except again, that's built more for investors, though it is possible to make sure that your bylaws kind of limit the role of investors, but it's, corporation can be like it can work if nothing else does. And then the last one's an LLC. That is the best one if you want a lot of flexibility or like a kind of non-traditional looking structure. A limited liability company. Number 2, investors. Agricultural cooperatives, you can have investors. Nonprofit corporations, no. So you can have members, but you can't have like shareholders who are contributing money and getting some kind of return. So that's a factor. Corporation, yes, you can, and limited liability company, you might have to change the term a little bit, but yes, you can. Profit distribution, yes, certainly possible with the agricultural cooperative association, not good for nonprofits. In fact, it's prohibited. You can't be distributing a profit to any like members or shareholders. You need to put all of the excess money back into the organization itself. Because with nonprofits, you don't really have owners. I know sometimes we say that members are the owners of nonprofits, but there really are no owners in a nonprofit corporation. They just make the governance decisions. Same with course corporations and LLCs, profit distribution is possible. And then, do you want a traditional co-op structure? Do you want to, make sure that that's in place? Obviously, co-op association is the best. Nonprofit, you can do it. I think you're not going to worry about investors taking over, shareholders, corporation. Not good. Like, I mean, depends if you're building an organization that, like, you know, outsiders are really interested in taking over. It's not good. If it's going to be small and you don't think anyone is really interested in taking over, then forming a corporation is fine, and just structuring it as a cooperative is fine. Also LLC, not designed per se to be a cooperative for forever. And then with, again, 1 and 5 are similar, not a lot of flexibility when it comes to a lot of flexibility and issues with having employees sometimes with some of these organizations, except for an LLC. If you want to have like your members, small group of membership members who are managing, co-managing the organization, and they're not really employees, an LLC is good. Okay, any burning questions with that?
Lillian in the chat has asked, does the corporation category include B Corps?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest, that much about B Corps, but yes, I think you can basically do the same thing with a corporation and a B corporation for the most part, except, you know, with a B corporation, there are certain principles that will always be upheld. So yeah, I think it's basically the same, except there's, you know, there's a lot of reporting. But if you want to be called that, because I know that that's popular with some groups, then yeah, you can have kind of a cooperative structure within a B Corp, I think. Okay, don't know why. Okay, I'm having trouble. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm having trouble like moving my slide. There it goes. No. Okay, I guess that's it. So then thinking about, I honestly am not an expert in this. I work with attorneys. I'm here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I know some about Arizona, a little bit about Navajo Nation, in terms of deciding where to incorporate. I mean, my experience with Navajo Nation is that I worked with a cooperative, and we filed the paperwork, and they just never processed it. So I'm not sure if that's changing. There's another one that is doing that now, and so I'll have to see how long it takes them. So I guess that's a downside for sure about incorporating in the Navajo Nation. Of course, you have tribal sovereignty, and so there's many benefits associated with that. And maybe fewer fees and regulations. I'm not so sure about, and the tax system. I'm not very familiar with taxation on the Navajo Nation, but maybe it's better than Arizona. Maybe fewer regulations, but I can do more research for any of you if you're interested. No online filing system that I know. Arizona, you know, one thing to consider, again, if you're going to have investors, and this idea of like shares that investors own rather than members, there's a whole area of called securities law that you have to comply with, and regulations. So that is something that I don't think exists on the Navajo Nation, but it does in Arizona. However, it's definitely faster to incorporate it there.
There's some questions here.
Okay.
If you're incorporating on a tribal nation and are doing business on the reservation, are you subject to state taxation?
No, that's something I do know. So you're not subject to, unless if you're operating on, and if you're doing like business on Arizona non-tribal land, for example, you may be subject to some state taxation. But if you're doing just business on tribal land, whether it's Hopi or Navajo Nation, that's one of the main ways in which tribal sovereignty actually can play out. In a lot of ways it doesn't, but you're just only subject to the tribal laws when it comes to taxation.
Two
So,
more questions. And along that same line, I'm going to jump to Lillian's. Do you even need to incorporate at a state level? And then there's a question from Troy.
well, that goes back to that whole thing of, do you want to have a separate legal entity, right? Like the benefits of that is that you can be more of a cooperative in the traditional sense. Members actually have real rights. You have a formal structure, and you're not just sort of melded in with your fiscally sponsored organization and their structure. So you don't need to. If you're small, and you're just kind of, you're not focused on the members, you're not focused on distributing profit. It gets tricky to be like, for a 501c3 organization to be essentially kind of operating a business. It's possible, but it's a tricky legal question that I can, again, provide some more guidance on. So that's kind of up to them. It's, in some ways, it's not your problem as the cooperative that is being fiscally sponsored. It's really their problem, their concern legally, in terms of like them operating a business, because that can create some issues with the 501c3 tax exemption. But you can't enter into contracts. So say as your cooperative wants to enter into a contract and have a formal agreement that can be enforced with a producer or a store or any kind of organization. Like, you can't do that unless you're an entity.
Okay. And the other question is from Troy Hanani. What about publication requirements?
Yeah, there's some rules in Arizona around publication requirements, which are sort of unusual. I'm not very familiar with them, but I think when you incorporate, yeah, you have to like publish in the newspaper that you did that. But there's some exceptions to that. So that's kind of a minor thing. I don't know that it should be a big factor in you deciding to incorporate in Arizona. I'm not sure about other areas.
Troy has his hand raised. Troy, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, so, in discussing incorporation or where to incorporate, and I guess that the step beyond, or that's it, to incorporate, there's numerous opinions whether you incorporate in Arizona, or incorporate in New Mexico, or you incorporate in Delaware, and you have all these conversations about the benefits and whatnot. But going back to Lily, I'm very interested in Lillian's questions, because I was told, if you want to cut down on the costs and the publications and everything, you incorporate in New Mexico and you do business on Hopi. I was told hypothetically that was probably a way to, I don't want to say game the system, but to take advantage of corporation scenarios. I also talked to somebody about Navajo, and then also about the state. And then again, it goes all back to this question: do you need to incorporate the state level? And I presume the formality affords you the benefits that you mentioned. But I'm just wondering about the publication, because I heard Arizona requires publication, New Mexico doesn't, and I know it's kind of getting complicated, and you probably will end up with a complicated situation. But I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, Arizona is the only place that I've heard. So that, I guess that's a downside. It could be a bit of a cost, but it's just a one-time cost. Yeah, you can, if you all are thinking about New Mexico, that's certainly an option. We know if that's another benefit, honestly. My law firm, small law office, we're experts in New Mexico. So you know that you like want a lawyer who knows about New Mexico law. That's more us. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think New Mexico, I'm more familiar with them. Things tend to work well there. There is actually someone who knows about cooperatives. Not many. Generally, cooperatives are not known. Like people are like, what's that? There's, I think, one person or a couple people there in New Mexico who know something about them. So yeah, those are all options. It's like, no, I don't, part of it is like, do you want to be close to the office? Like, do you want to actually physically go to the office, the New Mexico Secretary of State or the Arizona Corporation Commission? Those are things to consider as well. So.
Okay, and just to note, for folks who are able to see the chat, I'm not sure if you can see Oakley Anderson Moore publication that we did an LLC in Arizona, and we sent a publication to Arizona Daily Sun about it, a short blurb we had to write, and it was about $85 to get an ad in the paper. We went to their office in Flagstaff in person to do it. Thank you, Oakley, for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, it's like, okay, maybe you save a little bit of money, but it's not, maybe not a huge deal to publish. Okay, so moving on, then we get into federal taxation, which I know sometimes I've heard that entities on tribal land are subject to federal taxation. So not state though. So what's confusing sometimes about thinking about these things is that you can incorporate on the state level, and then there's not necessarily like a way that you're taxed that is, you form your nonprofit or you form your cooperative association. There's something called like a default taxation, but you can in some ways choose your own tax status, right? How you want to be taxed. And then there's like a whole sort of separate area of law around federal taxation. And of course, you want to structure your organization to a certain extent based on how you want to be taxed. But there's different ways to be taxed. So I'll just say at the end of the day, yeah, you can think about 501c3s and tax exemption and all the benefits associated with cooperative taxation. There are specific benefits, but at the end of the day, if you're not making very much, if you're not making profit or very much profit, you're not going to pay much in tax. So it's like you just don't, that's what you're taxed on, is the profit. So like what's left in your account at the end of the year, basically. So there are ways to not essentially pay very much tax, even if you just file as a corporation. That's kind of like the most, at the most basic level. If you want your entity to file taxes, you can just file as a C corporation, and you're probably not going to owe very much. So that's just something I will say. So when you're thinking about, I don't know, tax can get complicated. I don't know what people know already about it, but there's, as I mentioned, there's sort of being taxed on the entity level. So the organization itself is liable for taxes to the federal government, and then there's taxation on the like sort of member owner level, and that's what is called partnership taxation. That means that the entity itself doesn't really pay taxes. It just, the tax liability is imposed on the members of the organization. So that's what, if you have an LLC, you know, a single member LLC, it's easier to think about because it's just one person. But for a multi-member LLC, you know, it can get confusing because all of those different members are like sort of jointly responsible for the taxes. With a cooperative, it's a type of corporate taxation. So you're taxed on the entity level, but as an extra benefit for being a cooperative, if you do have a good amount of profit at the end of the year, you can distribute it back to the members on the basis of patronage, so their use of the cooperative. You know, how much they sell to the cooperative or how much they buy from the cooperative, and that's all deducted. So so basically you can essentially save some money in that way, but the members might be paying a little bit of tax on the distribution because they might be receiving income right from that. So I personally wouldn't it can be complicated to try to be taxed as a cooperative unless you're a big operation and you have a good cooperative accountant. So I wouldn't necessarily think about it right away. You can just kind of be taxed as a corporation, and then, you know, when you have enough profit, then you fill out an extra form and they tax as a cooperative after distributing those profits. So, but you have to operate on a cooperative basis. You need to have one member, one vote. And so you can do this even if you're like say a corporation, but formed as a cooperative. You have to have one member, one vote. You can't have too much, basically like the investors can't have too much control or get too much of the profit. You can't, then you need the profit distribution on the basis of patronage. Okay, so then going into tax exemption, thinking about being a tax exempt organization and applying specifically, say for example, to be a 501c3. That's one form of tax exemption. The main benefit for a 501c3, of course, is being able to receive grants and tax deductible donations. As I said, most of the time there's ways you can get around actually paying very much tax. So you might not be a 501c3, but you might not actually be paying that much tax if you don't make a lot of profit. But if you actually want, to file for that, it's pretty hard as a cooperative. Like as I said, there's some principles that are a little bit contrary to the idea of a 501c3 with cooperatives. If members are receiving financial benefits, or they're receiving, if the purpose of the cooperative is to benefit a certain group of members, that can be contrary to the idea of a 501c3. It's supposed to be a charitable organization that benefits the public. However, it may be possible to get away with getting a 501c3 status if you are in a low-income community and you're not very focused on the members' economic benefits. So it's possible. I think it's certainly possible if that's important. So, but the way that a lot of cooperatives do it is they have their separate, for example, this artist cooperative in Cine Pueblo, they're formed as a cooperative in New Mexico, under New Mexico law, it's called a general cooperative there. And they have their way of member governance and member contribution. And then they have a fiscal sponsor that is a 501c3, just for the purposes of, they don't deal with all of their money, but they do help them manage their grants that are coming in. So again, that's an example of, it's not either or. You can still have a 501c3 fiscal sponsor to help with some of the grant money coming in. If you have a particular like educational program or something, then that 501c3 fiscal sponsor then will, have an agreement to give over that money to the cooperative and make sure it's used in a particular way. But they don't necessarily manage all of the cooperative's money. So any questions on that?
There's quite a few questions in the chat, and I figured we could hold on to them until the end and get through these next couple of slides.
Okay. So the next slide is really just, I know there's a lot of different groups here, and I'm not sure if you're thinking about working together, but it is possible to, sometimes it can be beneficial to all work together, but sometimes it can be a challenge. So you can actually have cooperatives of cooperatives. Cooperative members can be businesses or little mini cooperatives in themselves. maybe that's thinking long-term, maybe you each have your own cooperative because you're operating locally, and there's ways in which you may want to partner together. So those are all things to consider in thinking about your structure. And then these are just kind of miscellaneous items. You know, to think about. These are just legal things to think about, most of which I already mentioned. But I'm just putting them out there as things to flag. Especially licensing can get tricky. So, I mean, I think I prefer to probably work with most of you on a case-by-case basis if possible to answer your questions or to help with these things. Yeah, so that's about it. Before we forget, I will answer questions, but I don't know, Vijiva, do you know where the evaluation is?
Yes, I have the link and I'm going to stick it in the chat. And while I'm
Okay.
doing that, Mark, do you want to start with your question?
Okay, so Vijiva, please fill out this evaluation. It's very important for us. We're fiscally sponsored, but we rely on grants as cooperative catalysts, and evaluation is really important. So please fill that out. Thank you. Go ahead.
Should I say the question I had in the chat?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just
Okay.
going to let people go through their chat and ask their questions themselves.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks, Eva. Appreciate your sharing all this information. Since you're an attorney in New Mexico, then I'm wondering if a Hopi entity could incorporate in New Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about incorporation is that actually anybody can, for the most part, states want you to incorporate in their state because they make money from it. So yes, a Hopi entity can incorporate in New Mexico. I think they might have to have a place of business. You could either just be a regular domestic entity in New Mexico if you have a place of business and like an physical address somewhere
In New Mexico?
Yeah, or you can be a foreign corporation. So I think that just requires a little bit more paperwork and fees if your physical address is not in New Mexico. So there's like kind of two ways to do it. But there's organizations that could serve as your, just as like an address, a place where official mail is received, basically. But yes, that's true, I believe, of both the Navajo Nation and Arizona too, is that all these organizations, they want people to, that's why a lot of people, also incorporate in Delaware. All these states and tribal nations, they want you to incorporate there because they want your fees from incorporation.
Okay, and the next question, Lillian, do you want to go ahead?
I have to jump off now, but I just made a comment there, and thank you all so much. And I'm sorry, but I have to head out for another meeting.
Okay, thank you so much, Lillian.
Thank you, Lillian. And if you have questions, you can email us. That was going to be our next step. Is I'm happy to kind of help to follow up with each of your groups with specific issues.
Because this is being recorded, I'm going to go ahead and pose Lillian's question. So, cooperatives doing business on reservations, are they subject to federal taxes?
Yes, they are. That's my understanding. I have asked my boss many times, and maybe there's something I'm not getting. Can someone turn themselves on? Thank you. Yeah, they are subject to federal but not state taxation, is my understanding.
And
but if you have a different idea of that, I work mostly with Pueblos, which are very different from the Navajo Nation. So Pueblos can't incorporate, they don't have their own laws, so they have to incorporate their own incorporation laws. So they're incorporating in New Mexico and they're subject to federal taxation, but my understanding is all and federal taxation applies to any entities and regardless of tribal sovereignty.
Okay. Lillian adds, it is my understanding that any income earned by a tribe is not subject to federal income tax, whether a tribal business activity is on or off Indian-owned lands. This doesn't pertain to tribally owned co-ops with members being tribal citizens? Question mark.
Yeah, so so I think there is a special form, in terms of income tax of individual members that would exempt you. Not very familiar with, but I could look into that more. But it doesn't mean that the entity itself isn't taxed. So it's tribal members may have received a tax exemption. And maybe there's an extra form that you fill. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and maybe the entity can.
We can look
receive the
into it.
exemption. Sorry.
I think we can look into it further. Sophia, I see is that you, Sophia, with your hand up?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to, I said in the chat, but I just wanted to iterate it here too. We do have one-on-one technical assistance available for folks. So if you have really specific tax questions, we can definitely schedule something, either with Eva or with an accountant or whatever. And we also can help you develop websites with this grant. So just so everyone knows, that's something that we can do. If you're interested also in getting the recording of this, put your email in the chat so that I can send it to you later.
Thank you, Sophia. Before Lillian left, she said she's also interested in learning more about investment strategies, accessing capital for cooperatives, establishing reciprocal business plans, and delving deeper into case studies or existing tribal co-op models. Tyrone Thompson said co-op 102. So that might be something we put together. And again, please go ahead and put your name, email in the chat, and the recording will be sent to you. And I'm going to go ahead and take another spot up here in the chat for the surveys. If folks have any more questions, please feel free to post them.
Well, I have a question if nobody else is having a question. On the 7 cooperative principles of for co-ops, it talks about open membership. But if anyone can join, does it water down the sovereignty or the focus of the group? Is there a way of restricting membership without, without being undemocratic?
I was actually going to put something to that effect in the chat and say, there is, first of all, it's principle, so it's not law in any way. And I would say that there are plenty of co-ops that restrict, especially indigenous, native-owned co-ops that do restrict their membership to tribal membership.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry that the scheduling has been a bit off.
I didn't hear that. Is that someone asking a question?
I'm not sure. I think we can go back onto gallery view if you're ready to close out the presentation.
Sorry.
There we go. Okay, so here we are. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. If there are additional questions, we're happy to answer them. And yeah, thank you guys so much for your time. I'm not sure.
I mean, I reserved, I can stick around. But you don't have to, but I can stick around for a little bit more time.
Okay, I'm going to sign off. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, please let us know what you thought and if there's more that we can do for you. So, go ahead.
Thank
you. Yeah, so I'm still here if anyone else has questions they want to just say out loud. We have questions about the recording. Dr. Sorensen, I know that you had a question at the beginning. Do you need more explanation?
I have one more question. So you used the example of Ace Hardware, and it sounds like I'm a customer once in a while at Ace Hardware, so I'm clearly not a member, but it sounds like that's a cooperative that bases itself on purchasing power. Is that right?
Yeah, that's kind of a cooperative of businesses. It's basically a cooperative of small hardware stores. It's not my favorite example because it probably doesn't apply to the everyday person. But yeah, cooperatives are really anything. They can be any configuration of individual members or businesses that are working together basically for some common benefit. So they purchase, like, they're all small hardware stores, and they basically have they work together to purchase for better prices together. So they'll order like a whole bunch of plywood all together and they get a better price on it.
So in the example of our farmers, then a cooperative, they could use it to purchase seeds or sell their produce, but it doesn't have to be membership based. Is that right?
I mean, the defining feature of a cooperative, in my view, is to have, there's always debates about these definitions, but I think that really kind of is a defining feature, is to have members and to figure out what are their benefits and how do they contribute. So I guess it's not necessary. I mean, I guess you could just call yourselves a cooperative without having members. So you can do something. People can do things together and receive purchase seed together. Maybe that's the difference between a food hub and a cooperative. Maybe there's no particular defined member, or they don't have voting rights, but you're still working together to jointly purchase. So it's certainly possible.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So I had a question. So we can be part of like Cameron's little group, Cameron Farm Enterprise. We can be a part of that, but still participate in this new cooperative that they're setting up. And as an individual, I don't have to participate as part of the Cameron Farm Enterprise. That's sort of a nonprofit governance situation in Cameron, but I can, as an individual, participate in the Osli cooperative, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no restriction on what types of. I'm not exactly sure about these organizations you're referring to, but you just have to look at their rules around what it means to be a member. And of course, you can be a member, you can be a participant in various different kinds of organizations. It just depends on what they allow, but no cooperative usually don't say, oh, you can only be a member of this cooperative and you can't be a member of other things. Does that make sense? So it sounds like you can probably you can participate and be a member in various organizations. I'm just not really sure what their rules are. Most of this is not, it's really kind of what the organization wants and what they decide.
Okay.
I'd like to piggyback off of May's question.
Go ahead.
So like May said, we do work with several different partners, and some of them may be nonprofits, and some of them may be NGOs. And so again, we're new at this, and we're just kind of open to membership, and we've just been going to place and kind of spreading our gardening gospel. So I guess for me, I'm open to whoever wants to join, but at a certain point, we'd like to kind of keep it restricted to members only. And I was wondering about Cooperative Catalyst and how far or what other resources they are willing to provide as we get our structure together, maybe like paperwork and getting incorporated and all of that good stuff.
So you're, where are you located?
Navajo Nation.
Is it
Western,
on the
Western
Arizona or New Mexico side mostly?
Arizona.
Okay. Unfortunately, we do have, yeah, we may be able to help in partnership with Star School or Apex Applied Technology, because they tend to be receive grants to help with technical assistance on the Arizona side. So if we can work in partnership with them, I can help. I'm not an attorney, we're not, we always have to say we're not licensed in Arizona or Navajo Nation. I am not. So I guess that's the formal official attorney. I can't be your official attorney, but we can, yes, we can help. Us as Cooperative Catalyst, we have a grant to only work on the New Mexico, fortunately, side of Navajo Nation. It's pretty arbitrary, but that's how it is. So, but I'm sure we could probably figure out how to help you if there's if we're partnering with Apex Applied Technology or Star School. And Sophia said definitely.
Well, just to respond to Tyrone's request for a 102 course, maybe we can follow up with something like that, Tyrone, and where you can get more in depth, and we can bring in additional people, accountants like Sophia was saying, or whoever you need.
Yeah, I think a follow-up workshop sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I would love, I'm not clearly not a tax expert, so having a CPA or something would be wonderful. Who's familiar with tribal issues.
That would be greatly appreciated. And thank you, Mark, again, for having us. I think one of the things that our farmers would be really interested in is the Schedule F for farmers, and how we apply that to the co-op as well.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Tyrone.
Hi, this is Jacobo. I just want to thank everybody for organizing this and being a part of this really informative meeting. I'm interested to see if you have any last thoughts regarding the relationship between nonprofit and cooperative. Being that a nonprofit is sometimes in the position to organize a little bit easier than an all volunteer group. Do you have any advice or parameters that you see with a nonprofit helping to launch a cooperative, and specifically if a nonprofit is able to put resources towards a cooperative in terms of hiring perhaps a staff person to move things forward? Is there any advice you can give in that process with the ultimate goal of the cooperative standing on its own with the support of a nonprofit?
Yeah, I think sometimes certainly cooperatives start through, yeah, a fiscal sponsorship, a relationship with a nonprofit. So as you're sort of starting up, just like Julian's group, I can't I can't pronounce.
The Cooperative I'm sorry, the Hopi Food Co-op.
Sorry, yes, that group. You know, I think it's good that they're starting through a nonprofit 501c3 as they're figuring out their structure and all of this. I think over the long term, again, if you want to operate more as a traditional cooperative where members have specific benefits and, you know, a very specific and sort of there's an independent role for the cooperative that's outside of the nonprofit, it's good to maybe eventually separate and form your own organization. But I think to start out, you can build kind of an informal structure if you have a good agreement with the nonprofit fiscal sponsor. It's up to them, you know. It's sometimes a lot to manage on their side because it's like a separate almost business in a way, or separate organization within their organization sometimes. So it's good to develop some clear agreements as to how the cooperative group is operating. And in any organization can hire staff. You don't have to, when I say relying on volunteers, it's certainly not necessary at all. If there's money to, through a grant or something else, to hire someone, a coordinator, whether it's through a nonprofit or just through the cooperative itself. A cooperative can certainly have employees. Doesn't have to rely on volunteers. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And just to clarify, the Hopi Food Co-op has a different fiscal sponsor than Hopi Titsko Permaculture, but our group is looking to support the cooperative to develop it more. And that includes a transition plan. But so what I'm hearing is that it's okay to organize and kind of operate somewhat structurally anyways as a cooperative, and then once it's ready to be able to incorporate, you know, and to have it already functional, and maybe one of the last steps being to incorporate as a cooperative. That's okay. There's no parameters against that.
Yeah, I think certainly if you have a fiscal sponsor that is willing to sort of take you on as you're developing your structure and is willing to work with you and your maybe unique financial needs, then that's certainly possible. It just depends on them.
I will share that for the Hopi Food Co-op, we have developed a leadership team, which is in place that's independent from the fiscal sponsor. And so that's kind of the vehicle right now holding it together. But it's all volunteer, and the next step we're looking at is actually trying to hire someone and to move some of that work forward. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Right, and so when it comes to hiring, again, if you're just kind of, so that again will require a lot of discussion with the nonprofit fiscal sponsor, because you as a sort of an informal group, even if you have a leadership structure, you as a group you can't really hire someone because you don't really exist outside of that nonprofit fiscal sponsor. So they're the one who would need to hire either an employee or a contractor. And so that's kind of up to them whether they want to do that and like sort of let you oversee that person in a way. Or it just really depends on on what they're comfortable with. And so sometimes that does become an issue with certain groups, with certain nonprofit fiscal sponsors not wanting to have an employee who they don't really know what's going on. It's like some other group is kind of really managing that employee or coordinator or working with them. They might not want to do that. They might want you to be like independent so that you can manage that person, that coordinator. So, yeah. So I would just talk with them and then see what they're comfortable with. And if you really need to form your own organization, then we're happy to help you do that. Okay, so we have Mr. Troy who has his hand raised. Do you still have a question? Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question yet. I don't know if I really, I guess, clarified the situation. But, I kind of live in a very unique situation where I live in Tuba City. I actually maintain two residences in Tuba City and Munkopi, which is like a quarter of a mile away, which is on the Hopi Reservation. So yeah, Navajo Reservation, Hopi Reservation. We live within the state of Arizona. Any incorporation questions that I have, because Hopi does not have incorporation laws, and most of my work would be done on the Hopi side. I mean, does that basically put me in a position of a choice of law situation if I want to formalize, if I've made that decision that I want to incorporate? Do I basically, as long as I adhere to the requirements of incorporation, any of these, three jurisdictions, is it really basically a choice at that point? And if it is a choice, what critical components or questions do I really need to be asking that will direct me on the best place to incorporate that? Because I have family members in New Mexico who can have a physical residence that can serve as a business location. So I'm just trying to, I'm trying to figure this thing out, and because it looks like I have that choice at this point. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of choices. There's also, this is a very complicated area, and so I don't want to give you very definitive answers. As you know, I'm sure it's really complicated often in your situation, but yeah, I mean, you have a number of choices, and then you're subject to the laws of those whichever one you choose, the business related laws of those organizations. So if Hopi doesn't have business laws, incorporation laws, then there won't be so much of a conflict because they just don't have laws around incorporation. But I'm not sure if they have laws around that might pertain to any income you're receiving from a business that's located, that is incorporated outside of Hopi. Or if there may be some other laws that pertain to you. But you do have a lot of choices, and there's so many different factors. I wish I could give you more specific guidance. The other complication, I should say, or it's kind of a benefit, is that there's an argument to be made if every member of your cooperative is operating on tribal lands, like within Hopi, then you may not be subject to certain kinds of laws, for example, employment laws, or tax laws out that are even within the state or jurisdiction where you're incorporated. So it's really just, it's like there's all these different areas of law there's a business incorporation. So if you incorporate there in say New Mexico or Arizona or Navajo Nation, you're subject to like certain laws around boards of directors and certain things that pertain very specifically to the business structure, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily subject to their employment or tax laws. But for you, you know, if you're very close to the New Mexico border and you have family there, maybe that's a good option for you.
Yeah, because I've talked to one guy that, you know, actually is doing this. You know, he's operating on Hopi, but has a New Mexico incorporation status. And he did the research, but this was a while ago in terms of incorporating in Arizona, but we didn't talk about Navajo. But he said, you know, he didn't want to deal with all the complication, the additional requirements that Arizona imposed, and that he did have a place of business, or at least an address in Albuquerque that he was able to use. So he just incorporated in New Mexico, and he's doing business in Hopi. He lives on Hopi. He does everything on Hopi. So he said that's probably going to be your best bet. But then, I want to make sure that I'm asking the right questions when I do this comparative analysis. Who do I really go to? Or is this maybe not even incorporated in either jurisdiction, but go to Navajo because I live on Navajo? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I wish I could give you, yeah, I think I would just ask around. I'm not very familiar with the benefits or downsides of incorporating a Navajo, honestly, or Arizona. I know that New Mexico, you know, there's certainly benefits to New Mexico in that it's fairly straightforward. Their offices are pretty well staffed. But yeah, it's maybe there are fewer requirements. So, and when it comes to tax law, with New Mexico, there's a gross receipts tax, but it pertains more to where you're doing business rather than where you're incorporated. So I wish I could give you a little bit more guidance. I'm sorry about that. It's very complicated. I think no matter what you choose, there's not going to be a huge difference. I think that's my opinion. There aren't really very big differences. So you'll probably be okay no matter what you choose. Except Navajo Nation, I just don't know how long they really take to process the paperwork. All right, I think that we're sort of running out of time here, but I'm happy to follow up with each of you. Sounds like there's a number of different potential cooperative groups here. So we're happy to provide you more specific technical assistance and help to answer some of these more specific questions after doing research.
Yeah, and that's something, we can offer through the grant, so it's no charge to the cooperatives or the people. So please take advantage of this while you can. And also, if you even just want to schedule a time to talk to Eva, that's not being recorded and be posted on YouTube. If you have more sensitive questions, we can schedule something like that as well. So yeah, thank you, Eva, so much for taking your time to do this. I think this was a very helpful and informative workshop.
Thank you all, and it sounds like you're doing great work, and I look forward to talking to you more. I think that, I don't know if you wrote down my email, but I'll just put it in the chat, or maybe for all the participants, especially if you fill out the survey. We have the recording of the chat. We can certainly send like a follow-up email with the survey and also with our, then you'll have our emails and we can all follow up.
Yes, definitely. And I'll be sending out a follow-up email as well. So you'll be able to see their emails on that one. I'll be sure to include you. But yeah, this is great. I'll have the recording up probably next week sometime. But people can use that to refer to it. And, especially if anyone knows someone who missed it and wanted to be here, you can pass it along.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.